Alright everyone, welcome back. This is Epo Dempsey Roll, and I'm just here to convey some news, some Yakuza news, while I just play a little bit, just to have something on the background. We're just gonna walk around. So, there was recently an interview with the director of Yakuza, Lost Judgment and Judgment, Kazuki Hosokawa, because obviously the release of Lost Judgment is imminent, so he's doing the press cycle right now, and there was some interesting things that came out of the interview, and that's kind of what I'd like to talk about right now. If you saw the headline of this video, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll know that it's about Yakuza taking place, future Yakuza games taking place outside of Japan. So how about we just briefly talk about the article overall, and this article is coming from thegamer.com, and I'll link to it from Jade King, and I don't want to go over the entire article, but it goes over the director Hosokawa and his history. He directed Yakuza 0, Yakuza 5, and Dead Souls, and he talks a bit about his experience with Dead Souls. Even though it wasn't like a super successful game, it taught him a lot about directing, and also the difficulties of making a game during this pandemic. It's a good, solid article, so I'll link to it, and I encourage you all to check it out. But towards the end, the bottom paragraph there, it mentions something that I found pretty interesting, and that's kind of what we're going to get into today. So let me just bring up the paragraph in question on the website. One moment. Right here. During the roundtable interview, Hosokawa-san talks about the studio's future and how it hopes to continue with worldwide launches for future titles while possibly exploring games in the Yakuza series that leave Japan behind, taking characters to new countries with new locations to explore, battles to fight, and mysteries to uncover. Much like Tales of Arise, Japan is now looking towards the wider world with a solid understanding of why its games are so appealing. People love Yakuza for how it depicts iconic Japanese landscapes and has an understanding of its culture. All told from a touching melodramatic perspective. So, yeah, let's get into that a little more in depth now. My notes. My paper fell here. So first I'd like to take that part that said, just that sentence there, looking towards the wider world, people of Yakuza for how it depicts iconic Japanese landscapes and culture. I think that's an interesting thing to note, because my initial sort of concern with like the Yakuza franchise going outside of Japan is, how are they going to treat depicting another country, another culture with respect? Like, are they going to be approaching it with the same level of detail and thoughtfulness that we see in the actual Yakuza games, the ones that we have right now that are set in Japan? And yeah, there's this question of sensitivity, like with representation. Like, are they going to be sort of mockingly depicting these other people in these other countries? That's kind of like a concern, right? However, reading this article over again, I think that's an unfounded concern, just because, again, it says here that the people love Yakuza for how it depicts iconic Japanese landscapes with an understanding of its culture, all told from a touching melodramatic perspective. Now, if they're going to apply that same kind of thought process to another country, then I don't think we really have anything to worry about, really. it's going to be the same kind of thoughtful presentation and depiction of Japanese culture applied to another country, another people, another culture, whether it be China or Thailand or South Korea or whatever, right? So I think the sort of overall gist I'd like to make is that it's going to, whatever country they choose, I think that it's going to be a depiction of that country that is fairly, realistic, fairly representational of how it is truly, but maybe it's going to highlight something, something kind of beautiful about what X country in a way that we might not have ever considered or thought about, in the same way that Yakuza games have visited Hokkaido, Okinawa, Tokyo, Yokohama, and it depicts these places with an eye for detail that otherwise may not have been really explored or noticed by movies or other video games, for that matter. Definitely, when it comes to video games, they don't often attempt to show places like that in a interesting and realistic way, So, on that same subject, we can kind of discuss quickly what places are they going to be going to, possibly potential candidates for a future Yakuza game that's outside of Japan. Now, when we think about the Yakuza franchise, there's often other gangs other than the Yakuza, like natively Japanese gangs, that you have to confront and battle, right? Even as far as the first game, there was like a Chinese mafia, and future games would feature like the Korean mafia, the Jingun mafia, something along those lines. The Gomi Jewel in this one, and the Chinese mafia as well. So because we have this connection to other gangs, I think that those two are good candidates for countries to explore, much in the same way that the Yakuza games will show the Korean mafia or the Chinese mafia as like getting into and expanding their foothold into Japan. I think maybe they might do something where it's the other side, where the Yakuza are sort of gaining a foothold in other countries, right? They could show that side of things, what it's like in Hong Kong or China to be a Yakuza, and the difficulties that they might have operating out of another country. Now, I can't say that I know too much about specific locations that might be interesting within South Korea or Hong Kong or China, for that matter. But that'd be something very interesting to look into and to talk about, like specific cities where it would be a good fit. Now, the other country that I'm thinking about in terms of a Yakuza game that would take place outside of Japan is Thailand, Bangkok, Thailand. And when you think about Yakuza games, they often use areas, cities that are not as heavily policed, a little lawless, for lack of a better term. and with a heavy influence on the red light district, the sex trade, and stuff like that. And all of those things, in my opinion, embody Bangkok, Thailand. And it's not like I've ever been there, but that's just the impression that I get from movies and stuff. So I think, and I understand that that's kind of a shallow understanding of a city and a place, but I could see them using that at least as a kind of starting point for a future Yakuza game. They could use Bangkok and its depictions in movies and stuff. It just seems like a really good fit. And there's movies like Tom Young-gung and Ong Bak, with both of them starring Tony Jaa, and maybe they could have a bit of a vibe like that. Maybe they could feature a character like that as well. That would be really cool. And if you watch The Protector or Tom Young-gung, there's a sequence where the main character Tony Jaa goes through several floors of a Chinese restaurant, battling all the way up to the top until he fights like the final boss, and he comes to understand what happened to his elephant. And something like that just seems perfect for a video game. In fact, when I first saw that movie, I thought, like, this looks like Streets of Rage or something. It's just like a single shot action sequence going through floors, and yeah, I could see something like that kind of making its way into a video game quite easily. Now, there's something else I'd like to mention, and I think I'll link to a more expanded thoughts video that I had recorded earlier, and it's regarding the red light district, or the sex industry, as it is depicted in the Yakuza games. And of course, we know that there's a thriving industry in Bangkok, Thailand. Well, I don't know if it's thriving, but there's definitely an industry for that in Thailand. I'll definitely link to my expanded thoughts on the matter, but I don't want to dwell on it too much. But it's something that I think the Yakuza games, in general, do a pretty good job of casting a sympathetic eye towards the sex trade, the industry, and they don't really show them as like these like abhorrent freaks that we should all look down upon and just forget they even exist. There's the main character here in Yakuza 7, of course, grew up in a brothel, in a soapland. So, and many stories involve that. So I think that they do a decent job. But if you are going to get into more stories of that nature, and I'm not saying that they will, if they do go to Thailand or any other place for that matter, I think it just requires an even more understanding and sensitive touch, and that actually goes into what I'd like to say about going to any country for that matter outside of Japan. Now, again, I would say that the Yakuza games do a very good job of showing other ethnicities, showing other people, and not making them the butt of jokes, right? There are some exceptions. A lot of the Westerners depicted in these games are often kind of like a joke. But by and large, they're just people, right? The Yakuza games mostly write people from other countries just as, regular people, right? And I think that's a good thing. But if you're going to another country, and if you're going to set the entire game in a whole other country, it's just going to require another level of attention to detail and respect for another country that isn't natively their own, right? And to do that, it's going to take some consultation with people that are native to the other country. And I think that they'll pull it off. but it's just something that I wanted to mention because in the past there's been issues with Japanese developers and a kind of insensitive eye towards depicting other countries, right? And I'm thinking mostly of Resident Evil 5 and how it took place in Africa, and they basically, without even really thinking about it, made like a very racist game. So, and Capcom, they were held to the coals about it, and they made a course correction, and ever since then, I believe that they've employed a consultant just to ensure that their games are being fair and respectful about depicting other people and cultures. It's not a big deal, but it's worth something. It's worth something to think about. So yeah, that's all I'd like to mention about that. Now, there's a third country that I think is a potential candidate for a future Yakuza game location, and it's a wild card. It's not likely, and I don't think this is going to happen, but it's my crazy wild card choice, and I'm going to say the US of A, good old America. And yeah, that's a wild card. That's a shot in the dark, but hear me out on this one. Now, I'll tell you why I think it's a bad idea first. I think it's a bad idea, again, just because now you're just getting so far away from what makes Yakuza, right? You're going into a whole other country, and you're gonna miss out, I think, on those uniquely Yakuza aspects. But the other thing is, you're gonna invite some unwelcome comparisons to Grand Theft Auto, as unfair as that might be. So, for those reasons alone, I think that it's just not likely that you're going to see America, but here's the only reason I think it might be kind of sort of interesting. There was a movie in like the mid-2000s called Brother, starring Omar Epps and Takeshi Kitano, I believe that's his name. Kitano himself, by the way, or Beat Takeshi as he's called. Beat Takeshi actually has appeared in the Yakuza games, in Yakuza 7, I believe. But in like the mid 2000s, or like around 2005, there was a movie called Brother, and it featured Yakuza mixing it up with gangsters, like gangsters in America, black gangs, right? And yeah, I don't really remember much of it now. It's been quite some time, but I thought it was actually pretty good, and it kind of was addressing those, like, the culture shock and the connections, this notion of honor that is shared between two. What does it mean to have a brotherhood, right, between gang members? And it was actually decent, in my opinion, although, again, it's been a while, so it's worth rewatching, I think. I'll have to watch it again, but that's the only reason why I think something like that might work, was that there has been kind of like the blueprint for it, and this idea of like a culture shock could be kind of interesting. But I think that's going to do it for me. Just a quick one to talk about this bit of news, and again, that's from Jade King in thegamer.com, and again, I'll link to it. I recorded some earlier thoughts which were a little disjointed, but I might link to them, link to that video as well for some expanded thoughts. So let me know what you think about a future Yakuza game taking place outside of Japan. Where would you like it to take place? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and do that all that algorithm BS, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye bye. Look at these guys.